Jim Harbaugh versus the world. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Yes, caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it, get it, touchdown, Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him.
And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Greetings and go blue. I'm Steve Deace, and welcome back to Michigan Podcast. We are back to regular order, which means, yes, can't you feel it? The season is just around the corner, and we can't wait. We're going to break down a lot of the big off-season headlines with our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor coming up a little bit later on. Also, the Twitter poll results, this week's question of the week, and more. But we begin with what we teased. You know, I said after the loss to South Carolina in the Outback Bowl, this was going to be a long-ass offseason. I mean, it was not going to be fun. And all of the narratives would be bad. And they were. It turned out it was even worse than I thought. Because we are witnessing something that I've never seen in my career in sports media. And I have, starting work in the Agate section, news assistant, bottom of the barrel sports desk at the Des Moines Register in 1995, to working in national sports media, to covering major college sports programs. I've never seen what we have witnessed over the last several months, and that is, barring a scandal, you have watched several sectors of national media do whatever they possibly could to turn the Michigan fan base against Jim Harbaugh. And I'm not really sure why. I don't know what it is about our coach. Is it the quirks? Is it the hype? Is it the lack of winning against the rivals? I mean, you would think we would be the people the most upset about that. Like, I don't know why Paul Feinbaum cares what Harbaugh's record against Mark D'Antonio is. Right? I mean, if anybody's pissed about that, if anybody should be fed up with that, who should be more fed up with this than us? This is our team. We're the ones losing the games. And there's something going on here. And I see this in my day job a lot, where people can just decide so-and-so's persona grates on me, or is this, or it's that, and therefore I can just cast off all restraint. I don't have to practice any modicum of professionalism or intellectual consistency anymore, and I can just be a total canoe. And because your persona gives me permission to show my rear end. And I have watched some level-headed college football analysts just say easily refutable things when it comes to the topic of our football coach. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I was listening to a prominent national sports talk network a few weeks ago, and the host was talking about coaches on the hot seat. And, of course, the topic turned to Jim Harbaugh. And he's like, I've got to believe Harbaugh's on the hot seat with Michigan fans. Takes a phone call. Very first call he takes is a Michigan fan. Michigan fan calls in, and he's like, yeah, I thought we were going to be better last year, but, year one way exceeded my expectations. Year two is probably about what I expected. Year three was a little below my expectations. So I kind of think, given where we were as a program, I thought the program's on track. We'll probably know more this year. I'd like to start beating our rivals too, but I don't think coach is anywhere near on the hot seat. The host said, thank you for the call, and then proceeded, after hanging up on this listener, to go off on a 15-minute rant about why he should be far angrier at Jim Harbaugh than he is. And I'm listening to this, I'm like, this guy lives in Florida. Why is he adamant that this Michigan fan hate and despise and dislike Jim Harbaugh as much as he does? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I was listening to another national sports network just last week, actually. And one of the true treasures for Michigan fans, John U. Bacon, the New York Times bestselling author, he was on doing an interview. And this host was adamant. Michigan should be doing a lot better, should be winning a lot more games. You're paying them way too much money. You're a football factory. Your kids really don't go to school, so why aren't you winning? I mean, this is the stuff he was saying. And I got to give John U. Bacon credit, man. He was a hell of a lot more patient than I'd have been, because I'd have lit this guy up like a friggin' Christmas tree. But, I'm not a good person like John. So I don't have Job-like patience. All right, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Okay, so I'll sit there with people I don't agree with, and as long as your arguments are intelligent, even if I don't think they're right, I'm happy to be patient with you. But the minute you try trolling me, we go Chicago way real quick. That's kind of my MO. I don't have any patience or tolerance for that, and that's what this was. This wasn't an inquisitive interview. It was an inquisition. And again, this guy's lecturing John U. Bacon, the modern-day chronicler of Michigan sports, on why he should be turning against Jim Harbaugh a lot faster than he is. Why? Why do so many of these national people care? Why are they so adamant that we see what they see? What is it about the coach here? And I think there's plenty of reasons. Well, I shouldn't say plenty. There are several reasons to be critical. You have seen that here on Michigan Podcast. The record against the rivals has to change. There's no doubt about that. We also were a program 4 years ago that were giving away tickets if you bought a Coke Zero. We were a national embarrassment on the player safety issue. Our season ticket holder base had been decimated. And now here we sit going into year 4. And Michigan has appeared in the AP top 10 as many times under Jim Harbaugh as they have combined the decade, 2005 to 2014, the decade prior to his arrival here. We're 28-11, which is really good. Probably wanted it to be a couple games better. And if a couple of those games switch, if a guy holds on, who's one of the best punters Michigan's had in recent memory, holds on to a punt snap, if JT Barrett's appropriately marked, how much different would this entire narrative be? But there is a drumbeat in the national media. You even saw it at Big Ten Media Days. Mark D'Antonio's up there talking about, hey, we're letting a racist back on the team. And Urban Meyer's up there lying that he had a wife beater on his coaching staff. And coming out of Big Ten Media Days, all the headlines were, Sparty69 me with 40 Twitter followers was asking Harbaugh about his record against rivals. And did you see what Jim said 3 years ago about chickens being nervous birds? That's trending worldwide, guys. One Big Ten coach is up there saying, hey, we got a racist on our team. We decided to let him back. And another Big Ten coach is up there saying, hey, we had a wife beater and I'm lying to you right now. But hey, trending worldwide as Jim Harbaugh says chickens are nervous creatures. I could come up with some answers as to why there's a sector of national media that is adamant that we pronounce the Harbaugh era a failure when it's barely just getting started. This is the first time he's going to actually coach a team with his own recruits, guys. That we turn on the coach I could come up with some reasons why this is a driving narrative with some prominent sectors in the national college football media right now, and none of them would be good. We get asked here at Michigan Podcast all the time, hey, we love what you guys are doing. How can we support it? Well, of course, subscribing here on our YouTube channel, on our iTunes page, on our Stitcher page, if you're listening to just the audio feed version, those things help a lot. Leaving us positive reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, and your various podcasting platforms. Those always help us too. And another way that you can help support what we're doing here at Michigan Podcast to help us cover our costs is to support us via Patreon. And if you're a Patreon supporter, you get some exclusive content that others do not get, including you get the breakdown of how I see Michigan's roster lining up with its three big rivals, Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Ohio State, who they face once the season gets underway in September. You'll get some of that stuff first and exclusively here at Patreon. And we're also adding a new tier as well. If you want to be a $25 a month booster club supporter of Michigan Podcast, we're going to put your name in lights right here on YouTube. We will give you a shout out or a shout out to whomever you'd like us to give a shout out to, with obviously certain limitations in terms of obscenity and things of that nature. But we're all Michigan fans here, so I'm going to trust we're somewhat enlightened. So if you want to be a booster or a supporter of Michigan Podcast and get content that you get first and only that others don't get, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and we are joined again in Season 2 by our good friend Michael Spath, the talk show host of WTKA in Ann Arbor. Good to see you, Michael. How are you?
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited about getting football season here. And, like I said, you can just put up with me a little bit. I'm sitting in my car right now because that's the best place that I have Wi-Fi at the moment.
That is peak college town right there. The best place to get the best Wi-Fi connection is in my car. If that is not peak college town, show me the coffee cup. No coffee cup?
Yeah, I definitely do have a coffee cup here.
Yeah. There it is, yeah.
It actually has Michigan Kinesiology right there, so.
Peak college town there. And this is like the best picture we've ever had with you, too.
It might honestly be. And mad props to these cars that they make nowadays that have Wi-Fi built into them. You couldn't have done this, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly.
Nope.
But now all you got to do is turn your car on, and there you go. Wi-Fi works better than the studio where we're having a little problems right now because they're doing some computer work. So,
well, Michael, we talked after the Outback Bowl loss back in January. This was going to be a long off season. It was going to be a brutal narrative of this off season. And I opened up the show this week giving our audience a couple of specific examples. One was a national show I heard John Bacon on last week. Another was a national show I was listening to a couple of weeks earlier. And it was literally the hosts lecturing Michigan fans and pundits about why they should be more negative about the program than they are. I've never seen anything like this except when there's a scandal surrounding a coach, right? There's easily refuted talking points. Look at Jerry DiNardo of the Big Ten Network, for example. I was listening to a show that he was on a couple of weeks ago. And, Shea Patterson's not going to fit in Harbaugh's offense. I don't think this is going to work. And I'm listening to this. I'm like, okay. So I tweeted to Jerry. I said, Jerry, do you really think the former #1 high school quarterback recruit in the country that half the mock drafts have as a first-round draft pick in this spring's draft, do you really think he came to Michigan when he had no other options? So he came here to do John O'Corn's fullback checkdowns. Jerry, do you really believe that? And DiNardo tweeted back to me, he goes, no, I think he'll be in the shotgun a lot. And I'm like, why didn't you say that on the show I was just listening to then? Why'd you join this narrative? I got no reply. Now, I have worked in sports media from a lowly news assistant on the Agate desk at the Des Moines Register in 1995 to covering major college teams, working in national sports media. I've got a long career at this. I have never seen, again, barring a scandal, what we've seen this offseason where there is a sector of national media that is, it just looks like they're lobbying fans to turn against Harbaugh. Am I wrong? And if I'm not, Mike, why do you think this is happening?
Well, I think something I heard in the offseason was talking about how there's no society that likes to build people up just to tear them down better than the United States. And certainly in our media, it's almost like Jim Harbaugh as a story right now is not really doing things for the media. He's not really making the same type of headlines that he was early on in his career. I think there's almost like this little bit of let's draw the animal out a little bit. Let's keep on talking about Harbaugh. He's not doing the things that we want him to do that are getting us the clicks, but we're going to talk about him anyway. And how do we get the clicks? We're going to get the clicks by saying that he needs to go, that he's overrated. It's still an obsession with Harbaugh and an obsession with clicks in our society. I think that, Steve, is more than anything why they're creating this narrative. They've got to keep Harbaugh in the spotlight. They've got to keep him in the national news because it does a lot for their page views. And what's the narrative this offseason? No one's going to talk about his trip to Paris. No one's going to talk about the quarterback situation. What they're going to talk about is saying a guy like that is overrated, probably is on the hot seat, deserves to be fired if he doesn't win this year. That's going to get the needle moving. I think it's as simple as that. I really don't think there's these guys have an ulterior motive. I don't think that they are out to get Harbaugh. I think they're trying to get clicks, and this is the best way to do it.
We came out of Big Ten Media Days and I think I've demonstrated on this show, I'm really not into conspiracy theories, and victimology is just not a part of my makeup in any walk of life I'm involved in. To me, unless it's an egregious robbery like Columbus a couple of years ago, my basic sentiment is if you don't like the outcome, score more points. Take responsibility for your own actions. But we came out of Big Ten Media Days, and one of our rivals coaches said, hey, guys, I'm putting a racist back on my team. Another one of our rivals' coaches stood there and lied multiple times for hours that he had no idea one of his other assistant coaches was beating his wife. And yet the big story was Sparty69me with 40 Twitter followers got a pass to ask Harbaugh, don't you think you suck and you should be overrated, and resign. That went viral. And something Jim said 4 years ago about chickens being nervous birds. How does that happen?
Wow. I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth. I think when you look at those two situations, especially with Urban Meyer, now the news has become about Urban Meyer and Jim Harbaugh's living in the background. The Michigan State story, I think it's benefit of the doubt. I honestly think that's what it comes down to, Steve, is benefit of the doubt. And at Michigan, Jim Harbaugh earned the benefit of the doubt at San Francisco. He earned the benefit of the doubt at Stanford. So far at Michigan, he has not earned the benefit of the doubt from the media, from a big segment of the fan base. And so that's what it comes down to, is if he was Mark D'Antonio, if he was Urban Meyer and had the track record and the accomplishments on his resume that those guys do at Ohio State and Michigan State, I don't think we'd be talking about this very much. But there is a large section, again, that's saying, what has he done yet at Michigan? And like you, I don't make excuses for Michigan. I know that Colin Cowherd was saying, hey, they could be 3-3 against their rivals. They could, if not for 6 inches, they beat Ohio State in 2016. If not for one of the most ridiculous plays you've ever seen, a punt block in 2015, they're 2-1 against Michigan State. They could even be 3-0 against Michigan State. But the fact of the matter is, Steve, is that they are 1-5 against their rivals. They haven't won a Big Ten title. They finished 3rd or 4th place in the Big Ten East. And so you can't run from those numbers. And so Jim Harbaugh has not yet earned the benefit of the doubt among the national media and the fan base here in Ann Arbor. And I think that's why he gets taken to task. And it's really stupid, because essentially what it's saying is, because you haven't done these things on the football field, we care much more about your wins and losses than we do about the things you're doing off the field. And that's what's probably wrong with our society right now, Steve. You know
what I find exceedingly frustrating about this, too, is it just seems like much of our culture nowadays, Michael, is what I like to call false choice daily. We just decide to set, people 2 terrible options, pardon me, and you have to choose one, or you're just a wretched person. And so we're now presented as Michigan fans this false choice where we have to pretend almost last season wasn't a disappointment. We have to pretend almost that there aren't some legit criticisms that I think almost all of us had coming out of the Outback Bowl, because the criticisms from some of the other sectors in the college football world are so over the top and so ridiculous that they don't give you room for critical analysis. You almost feel like I can't let you slide saying some of those things. I have no problem if someone says, I don't think Michigan will be any better. I think the schedule is too tough. I mean, it's one of the tougher schedules in the country. I don't have a problem with that. But I do believe that if literally any other Power 5 coach, the other 63 Power 5 schools, Any of them. I'm talking Ed Orgeron, any single other one. If any other Power 5 coach were at Michigan and they had 17 starters back and all these players back, and the idea that they would, and they brought in the caliber of transfer quarterback they did, the idea that they would be better than they were the year before would not even be a debatable point. But this is a point that is being made because I think of Harbaugh disdain, frankly.
Steve, I mean, we talked about it on our show on Tuesday. West Virginia was 7-6 a year ago. And let's face it, West Virginia underneath Dana Holgorsen has been a disappointment since joining the Big 12. They haven't really done a whole lot.
They haven't won more than 8 games since they've been in the Big 12, actually.
Right. They're 7-6 coming off the year, and they're ranked number 10 in SportsIllustrated.com's preseason top 25. So you're dead on. If you were talking about Penn State was ranked number 7, and they don't have nearly as much coming back as Michigan does. They have one factor that Michigan does not, and they have a proven quarterback in Trace McSorley. Michigan's still kind of waiting to see if Shea Patterson's that guy. But you're dead on that if you were any other program and you had this amount of guys coming back, even coming off a disappointing 8-5 season, people will be talking about national championship run. Mm-hmm. And instead they're talking about, is Michigan going to be able to finish higher than 3rd in the Big Ten? Is Michigan going to be able to win 8 or 9 games this year? So it is pretty incredible that has been the offseason narrative. At the same time, again, Jim Harbaugh and this Michigan program need to win something.
When you
sorry, just had a friend walk by.
That's okay.
Just random Ann Arbor moment, right?
This is peak college town television. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So if they win,
did they have a petition they wanted you to sign by any chance?
No, not at this particular time. But trust me, today's primary day.
Yes,
I'm sure that it's on the docket for me here.
When you look at how Michigan has handled this offseason, the things they can control, what stands out to you, right? Because the big thing we've heard from, I'm sure you've heard this from your listeners, I've heard this from our audience, less talk, more action. No reports. We don't believe anything. And, I have really kind of shelved a lot of, who did what in the spring and everything else. And I'm just waiting. I think I told you this in January. I am in the crowd of, I just want to see what's going to happen September 1 against Notre Dame. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm from Missouri. You got to show me, right? So how have you covered the off season, which is excruciatingly long, even in the best of circumstances? But given how short of a fuse a lot of our fan base has right now for off-season optimism.
Yeah, I think when we were talking back in January, February, March, you and I agreed that it was a show-me type of year and that I wouldn't buy into the hype. Now, I don't buy into the hype, but my tune has changed in how I've reported about Michigan. I haven't focused on what they haven't accomplished. I've instead focused on what they're capable of accomplishing this year. That doesn't mean that Tariq Black or Nico Collins or Donovan Peoples-Jones will go out there and be huge successes. Do they have that potential to be? Yes, but they still have to go out there and show it. But I've turned from a pessimistic point of view to an optimistic point of view. And frankly, I don't know why someone would spend 6 months in a pessimistic attitude. I get that there's a lot to be proven still. But if you're not going in the football season, here we are, 24 days away from Michigan's game. If you're not going in this football season excited about the possibility of Michigan football being really good, then I don't really know what the point of being a fan is, because every year, this is what we do as a collective sports society, is we get our hopes up, and then we let that team crash them down. And so even look at the Tigers this year, the Detroit Tigers, the Red Wings, the Pistons. Now, we didn't think they were going to be competing for championships, but we thought hey, maybe this could be a decent year. Maybe the Red Wings take a step forward. Maybe the Pistons take a step forward. And with Michigan, I think when you look at this rationally, there's no reason that they can't be a Big Ten champion this year, based off of the roster, based off the experience coming back, based off of Shea Patterson being there. I know the schedule's hard, but a lot of teams have hard schedules. And so I've moved on. I made that transition probably, I would say, mid-May or so. And I'd rather be excited about the year and about the possibilities and the potential of this football program than still sitting here doom and gloom and, Michigan football is going to be bad. Frankly, I wouldn't enjoy my job, and I wouldn't even want to do my job if that's the way that I was taking the approach right now.
Final thing I want to ask you about is, no one in the history of college football, no coach has ever showed up on signing day and said, guys, I just got to level with you. Yeah, we didn't get a lot of the guys we want, and these guys will be getting my ass fired in 3 to 4 years. That's why I love the word buyout. No one ever says that, okay? No one ever hires a new strength and conditioning coach and then comes back in August and says, well, we're fatter and slower than we once were. No one ever does that, okay? So I'm not going to ask you about all that stuff. Having your ear to the ground, though, with people that are close to the program. For our audience here at Michigan Podcast around the country, people that you trust who are level-headed, have seen things with their own eyes. Can you give them a couple of tidbits of things that kind of helped you make that turn in May, and now as we get closer to the season, about, you know what, I think this team could accomplish some things, and this is what's different than what we were seeing and hearing before?
Well, I'll start at the most obvious one, and that's the quarterback play. I mean, how bad was quarterback play last year? I mean, you're talking about in the history of Michigan football, I can think of 3 seasons. Last year, 2008, Rich Rod's first year with Stephen Threed and Nick Sheridan, and the Demetrius Brown year in 1987, I believe, as the 3 worst years in the history of Michigan football, at least in my lifetime, of quarterback play. And so at the very onset, what you have is a extremely capable quarterback, the best quarterback physically that Jim Harbaugh has had yet on his staff or yet on his roster. And let's face it, even though people are kind of saying like, well, we're having the quarterback whisper, when he had talent in Andrew Luck, when he had talent in Colin Kaepernick, when he had talent in Johnson at University of San Diego, when he's had the talent, those quarterbacks have been very, very good. And so I've heard that Shea Patterson is going to be, I don't want to say this lights out Baker Mayfield type quarterback, but I've heard that he's going to be a massive upgrade at the quarterback position. I've heard really good things about the running back, the wide receivers, essentially the skill players. Everybody on the skill players in offense, I've heard are, in a position to have their best seasons. The defense, I don't even think needs to be spoken about because they're coming off a terrific year. They're going to get bigger and stronger. Guys like Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich could be poised for even bigger seasons. Again, I think it all comes down, and we all know this, it comes down to those 2 tackle spots on the offensive line. And the only thing that I've heard about that has given me some optimism is that Ed Warner has gotten the best out of guys like Juwan Bushell-Beatty, the best out of someone like John Runyon, because this is still maybe a little bit of a stopgap year between having that old guard of offensive tackles and having the next group ready to go. And if you were going to tell me that we're going to go into the year with Juwan Bushell-Beatty and John Runyon as Michigan's 2 starting tackles, I would have been a nervous bird. But hearing that Ed Warner is getting the most out of both of those guys' ability, and what is their ceiling is probably not as high as some of the younger guys, but their floor, if you can bring the floor up a couple of notches, a couple of levels, well, then it can be a pretty good offensive line with what they have in the interior.
And then really quick, as fans, we love to talk about the new guys, right? But this time of year is often about veterans who get overlooked and realize the clock is ticking and it's time to, poo or get off the pot. And you mentioned a name the other day, Eddie McDoom, that's sort of become he was a punchline last year and it wasn't his fault, throwing ridiculous fades to a slot receiver. That was sort of the snapshot encompassing of what last year's offense was. But like you mentioned him.
If I picked you for my 5-on-5 game and I made you my center,
not a good look. Yeah.
That's what they were doing with Eddie McDoom last year.
I mean, is everybody 4'8"? Then it might work.
Yeah. So Eddie McDoom is someone that I've heard some really good things about, that he feels inspired and motivated to have his best year. Even like Juwan Bushell-Beatty, I've heard that he's really put together a solid summer. There was some talk at the end of the spring that he was getting passed over and that James Hudson, all he had to do was essentially show up to fall camp and it was going to be James Hudson's job. Apparently, Juwan Bushell-Beatty took that as an onus and really has worked really hard and is now back in a spot where he is the projected starting left tackle. So that's someone that I'm looking forward to. Along the defensive side, I mean, everybody we know is doing really well, but Josh Metellus has come back as a junior. He feels like he's got something to prove after, kind of crapping out at the end of last season and having that big drop in the Michigan-Ohio State game, and everybody kind of, myself included, just kind of like throwing him out with the bathwater. So he's another guy that I've heard is really motivated and is doing big things. And so, you know what? I think there's veterans that are excited. And certainly when you look at this group that's going to be a sophomore class, I think those are the guys that are going to take the biggest leap and really help Michigan football take the next step and compete for a championship this year.
Great stuff from Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. Listen to his show each and every morning. It's a great listen. Michael, thanks for joining us again this week here on Michigan Podcast.
Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it. All
right, take care. Coming soon, That's all I can say right now, but stay tuned. You're going to be seeing that logo more often here, and we'll tell you what it means soon. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and our first Twitter poll result of Season 2. We asked you, what is the most important game on Michigan's 2018 football schedule? Ohio State overwhelmingly was your selection as the most important game Michigan will play this season. I have to tell you, I think it's Notre Dame. I do. I think that game, if you win that game, game day is going to be there. Prime time, under the lights, under the Golden Dome. It will be one of the highest rated college football games this season, and it wouldn't shock me if it was the highest rated college football game this season. Two of the largest, most loyal fan bases on the continent squaring off, and two coaches that haven't faced each other before, the renewal of the rivalry. If you win that game, the entire offseason we've spent this show talking about is gone the next day. And all the momentum is in your favor. You lose that game, and all that negative narrative from the offseason gets dialed up to 11 there, Spinal Tap. And if you look at the history of the Michigan-Notre Dame game, it has been a barometer. Since the series was renewed in 1978, only one time has Notre Dame lost to Michigan and then won double-digit games in the regular season. Only one time. And if you look at seasons where Michigan has bounced back from 4 losses or 5 losses or more in recent memory, 1985 coming off of 1984, for example, 2006 coming off of 2005 as another example, those are seasons where Michigan got an early kickstart by upsetting favored Notre Dame early in the year. So I think that there's a lot riding on that game. Michigan needs to exercise a lot of demons, get rid of, you haven't beaten a ranked team on the road in 12 years. Just get rid of all of that right from the outset, clear the air, and start building momentum for the rest of the season when you do take on Sparty and Ohio State in crunch time. This week's question of the week here on Michigan Podcast, and it's actually from our friends at Bigger 10. If you want to follow them for Big Ten coverage, they've got a great podcast there you can subscribe to on iTunes as well, at Bigger 10. They asked their Twitter followers, who will be the Ohio State head football coach in 2019? 30% said Urban Meyer. 12% said Bob Stoops. I have a hard time believing if Urban Meyer's gone, you're going to bring in the guy with the Joe Mixon tape, but who knows? 14% said Greg Schiano. I don't see that either, given he was on the staff when the whole Sandusky thing was going on. And 44% of you said someone else, and I think that's the right answer. I think someone else will be coaching Ohio State in 2019. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget, keep up to date on everything we do every day by following us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. I want to thank our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping us get the word out about this show each and every week. And don't forget as well, you can subscribe to the podcast version on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Please help us share the word. We'll see you again next week, and go Blue.